our first candidate, Kathryn Garcia, here in the House. I am coming to you from Greenpoint, Brooklyn. And let me introduce Kathryn. She has been many things, but among them, CEO of the city's Environmental Protection Agency, Sanitation Commissioner for 7 years at least, and in the midst of the de Blasio administration, also the pandemic food czar and NYCHA fixer. I'm not sure what the exact title was, but it was in that vein. So, Kathryn, thank you so much for being here and welcome. You know, I don't want to scoop him too badly, but I learned today that you are one of the fearless few who answered the Dave Cologne bike ride challenge.
I did.
He hasn't written about it yet, but it would be great if you would just, kick off with some of your, your impressions of your ride with Dave, and also just, or any other ride. How do you see the city from the saddle of a bike? What stands out to you?
It was a great afternoon, and the sun came out, which I was very appreciative of. Biking in the very cold weather is a little tough on me. But I did think he had designed the ride to see whether or not I could survive biking in traffic. And so the fact that I am here with you tonight, I feel is a success on my part. But what we saw is what everyone sees from being on a bike from the saddle is there is not enough space when you are trying to share lanes and you're getting squeezed, and it's dangerous. I want to be like, I give up. I agree. We need more bike lanes that are protected. Do I have to go through this truck jam and bus jam going forward? I agree. I cry uncle on this one, but there are places where we also went through that have great bike lanes. And then you do feel like it's much safer, and the speed of which you can get around and not be on high alert is much more relaxing, and you can actually look around and oh, we're going through Sunnyside and look at how beautiful this is. And oh, wow, there are the rail tracks. So it was also strange to not know where you were going to go. I didn't know where we were going to end up. And so we ended up in Long Island City, and I was like, well, I know how to get home from here. So that's good. Which you just which turn are you taking? But, you definitely see that, in many areas, bikes are sort of deprioritized, but in other areas where they are, how effective they are as a means of transportation.
Yeah, it's actually one of the things that makes it, tough to talk to people who don't ride about, because, my background tonight is kind of our Rorschach test for you guys. These are 2 protected bike lanes that, were put in, 3 or 4 years ago and are chronically filled with cars and trucks. But, then you get into a place like Queens Plaza North, where there's a beautifully constructed bike path and it works tremendously. And then you have stuff in between, like the lanes you probably rode on Skillman or 43rd Avenue, which work just great. So you've put together a lot of stuff in your policy statements about streets and transportation and cycling. So do you want to just dive in and spotlight some of what you want us to focus on in terms of the stuff you've put together? There's a lot to like there. So
yes,
I think there's certainly more than we can talk about in a short session here.
Well, I like to have very full plans, and then I actually like to achieve them. And so I believe everything I've put in here is ambitious, but achievable. And, we definitely need to expand the protected bike lane network. I said I will do 250 miles and make sure it's connected across the city. I have a son who bikes to work also every day, and I want him to be safe. I need to know that he's going to get back and forth from his apartment to his job in a way that's safe. But we have to maintain what we build. This is one of the things he's complained to me about is how many tires can I pop when I'm biking around, even in protected bike lanes. And we need the right equipment. I look forward to when I'm mayor, being able to buy multi-hogs and sweep them and plow them. You got to have the right equipment to do the job.
So this lane over here, we could cap it and keep those trucks out if we had the skinny equipment
Yeah, we could absolutely do that. And we know that where lanes have also worked well is where we really are uh, creating a barrier, a physical barrier, even if that's other parked vehicles that are not in the bike lane. And then you don't have delivery trucks pull over and block them and force bikes out into traffic. But we also, like the city bike world, it sort of stops, and integrating that into almost a multimodal system for folks, particularly way out at the edges of the borough, so that they can use city bike to connect to the train, to connect to the bus. I see an overlapping network there. In case all of us don't get a pedal assist and have to go a long distance. I did not have a pedal assist bike, but it is something that is working, that people love. And we need to make it so that it's expanded to all of our neighbors across the city. But the other thing I feel is that, in order to truly create Vision Zero, it is about the physical infrastructure. We can't just depend on people to do the right thing all the time. They clearly don't. And so we need to make it impossible for them to be doing the wrong thing. And so, that is where you think about making sure protected bike lanes are truly protected and available and accessible. That is what I think really is required to achieve Vision Zero, to ensure that there aren't accidents with bicycles, where there are crashes. We cannot have that. Even obviously, a bike is always the most endangered. And bike safety is paramount. We have to protect, not only people who bike for commuting or for recreation, but people who bike for work. If you think of all of the delivery folks who are using bike lanes because we're requesting deliveries, particularly during COVID, that is something I feel very strongly about. But also expanding infrastructure, like bike parking, so that you can really take your bike to work. And, then incorporating into our streets also arts and culture. I really see that the public realm needs to be rethought, and that we have real opportunities there. And, bikes are part of ensuring that we achieve climate change. And if we think about changing our street infrastructure and making it so that it's greener as well, we get cooling, we get cleaner air, uh, and we can do that. And we can do that by accelerating all of our processes, the bureaucratic nonsense that gets in our way, the alphabet soup of agencies that block. Even when it's in your budget, it's not actually really in your budget. You got to go through a whole bunch of hoops to make it happen.
So can I ask about the alphabet soup? Because you mentioned, plowing and sweeping bike lanes, which is a sanitation operation.
Yeah.
And, I think illegal parking is really out of control in the city, and that's a parking enforcement function. And the thing that's always driven me crazy, and it's kind of a weird thing, is that, like, we have DOT regulations, sanitation operations, and parking enforcement that for decades has moved, tens of thousands of cars around every day for alternate side parking. But we can't keep these special lanes clear because no one's ever said, you three agencies work together, figure it out and do it. And, do a resource review. Maybe there aren't enough parking agents. I don't know. The city has never admitted this a problem, so we don't know if there's any analysis about that. But can you, most people won't ever be in a meeting at City Hall where that kind of stuff is going on. But, it's what you do and what you've done. So can you sort of paint a picture for us? Like, what does that look like? You're a mayor in January, February next year, and you're like, we need to rethink the public realm. So what does that room look like?
So that room looks like, you want to have your key commissioners in the room. And you need the Office of Management and Budget, because things cost money and they need to hear you say that you want it paid for. Because sometimes if they're not in the room, they pretend like nobody ever told them you were going to spend money on that. And, that sits down, and then you say, here's how we're going to craft this. Here's exactly what you're going to be responsible for. What is the Department of Design and Construction going to build? What's DOT going to build? What does sanitation need in terms of equipment? You also have to ask, make sure FD can make the turn onto your block still with a fire engine. and check all those boxes, but they're not insurmountable. And you create those teams, give them their marching orders, say, I need this to get underway, and then keep bringing them back together to check in. And that's the way I would run it. That's the way I run my organizations that I've worked in. Is you set the table, you give them their direction, you empower them to get it done, and then you bring them back and hold them accountable.
We love to hear that. I mean, we that meeting can't happen soon enough in our estimation.
And it's the trucks, like they need the ones right behind you.
Mhm.
That's a straight traffic enforcement issue. That is
Traffic enforcement, and they need somewhere to go. And in some cases, that hasn't been given to them, and they need some loading zones. And you got to figure out how to make them work. But yes, absolutely. So, so that's how you would frame it for city government, which is, sounds fantastic. How do you then frame that for the public? Because you've written, you want to see DOT be able to go with these things and not be held up by process. And, you've said incremental change. It's too late for incremental change. We just have to go and do it. So how do you frame that for the public in a way that sort of gets us out of the mile by mile trench warfare that we see sort of with city agencies and community boards now?
Well, we need to show a whole vision of what this looks like across the city. What does a greener city look like? How do we make that happen as we move forward? And how do we make it so that here's how bike lanes work? Here's how we're going to actually ensure that, your grocery store can get the deliveries it needs. That an ambulance can get up the block no matter what. That we can have streets that are really functioning across all different modes of transportation, and everyone gets their fair share. And, that has been my position, is like, I'm not trying to ban the automobile necessarily. There are folks in the outer boroughs where you can't get to the grocery store without driving. It's just, our buses, our subways don't actually run that way. But we need to make it so that we're re-envisioning it and rebalancing it and protecting everyone. You've got to protect your pedestrians, you got to protect your bicyclists, and make sure that they're safe, because they're the most environmentally friendly of the bunch.
So you sort of frame this as we're going to do it. Community boards may have a role, but do they still get to say no?
Well, I mean, my understanding, and someone can correct me if I misstate this, is that it is a consultative process. And so they would retain their current role as being consulted about the bike lanes.
Yeah, I mean, that's true on paper anyway. It seems to be a little murkier in practice these days, but it's very hard to have a transportation network if somebody can opt out. And you talked about connectivity as a key thing.
It'd be like if you couldn't run the subway, in portions of, between, 7th Avenue stop and the Fort Hamilton stop on the F train.
Right.
Well, that sort of strands everybody at the end of the line. And so we need to ensure that people think of bike lanes in the same way that they think of their subway, as a network of connectivity, because that will change the game.
The one of the I think, if I'm reading it right, the council's attempt to try to fix that process was the street master plan legislation, and it's a little bit murky. DOT said it's going to be delayed. I don't think it's terrible for it to be delayed, because I kind of want the next mayor to own whatever the first version of the street master plan is. It may not be a universal opinion in the advocacy world, but I would like it to be a product of the next mayor, not something that gets handed off. But is a street master plan something that seems like a good framework for you that you want to take forward? And your goals may be bigger than their numerical goals in the street master plan, but it's it's something we don't do today. We don't sort of talk about it holistically and present that vision. But it's actually the city's law now.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think having New Yorkers see the whole picture is really important for their buy-in into things changing, things being a little bit different, but also allowing them to envision a different future. And the one thing that COVID did is open streets and open restaurants were extraordinarily successful. And, you know, when I was in Queens on the bike ride, it's like you see children on, you know, scooters and, you know, folks on skateboards and kids on bikes. And there's a sense of community, particularly for those areas that don't have a lot of green space. This is a real opportunity for them to get physical exercise, you know, feel better mentally, just to be outside.
One of the other things you've written down in your policies is that you would like open streets and complete streets to be beautiful, safe, and enjoyable. And you mentioned fairly robust infrastructure that you want to put in, and you tend to notice, you know, one of the, you know, you notice sort of cities that are adapting quickly to, say, sustainability or equity policies, like Paris, which is becoming bike friendly sort of before our eyes. They actually build stuff with, you know, concrete and steel and you know, and other hard materials. And we're trying to paint our way to it. It looks like in New York, and we use a lot of plastic. So, you know, the idea that you're saying we're going to build more, I really like, because I think, you know, paint and plastic and, you know, moving parking lanes around, those are great ways to get something started. But even, you know, we did a lot of those protected bike lanes back in 2007. We still haven't really rebuilt those streets with real infrastructure. A lot of them are being rebuilt back with the same paint and, you know, kind of, you know, regulatory stuff. And not that many people realize that those are all substitutes for the fact that we don't really rebuild streets very much in the city. So, you know, you've talked a little bit about getting DOT back into street capital reconstruction.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be a big change, and I think a welcome one, given that we do see, you know, mostly paint and plastic that you know, really just gets run over and becomes more street trash on our streets. So, you know, you want to talk a little bit about, and I'm curious how your DEP experience, you know, adds to that, because, you know, yes, we do have to replace water mains, but it doesn't mean every time we build a new bike path, needs to take 15 years.
It doesn't need to take that long, though. When you do a complete reconstruction, you do usually want to make sure that you've rehabbed the sewer and replaced the water main so that it doesn't break and destroy what you just built. Because they have a tend to, when they get older, to get a little, that happens.
Yes,
They get a little bit brittle as they get to be 100 years old. But this is where, like, I understand how you do capital fast and how you do capital slow. And having blanket certificates to proceed from OMB, which is really super wonky, but it really means you've got permission to go, would be very helpful. You know, that is one of the things that I would look for, is how many different steps can we take out of it? The other thing that's really useful is incentives in contracts for contractors. They go faster, and speed is costly. Like, if you don't go fast, you cost more money in construction. So I will streamline that when I am mayor.
That's, you know, again, music to our ears. You know, one of the other areas where we have kind of a Frankenstein monster around governance and budgeting and, you know, and even maintenance is the Greenway network. You know, we do some things really well in the city, like when we rebuilt the West Side Highway, we put in, you know, the country's busiest bike path along the west side of Manhattan. But we've been very slow to add to that network. And those fully protected, fully built out things are what really draw, you know, people from, you know, small kids to the elderly, because of the full separation that they have. But today in New York, we don't really have any policies, any design standards, or anybody really in charge. We have EDC, which has some random pieces of it. Parks Department has parts of it, and they're not always that excited about bikes on some of those paths. DOT does some in connection with DDC, and they tend to be the really long, drawn out projects. So, you know, that would be another place where you know, the ability to knock heads and bring people together and say, you know, maybe we could take this off Parks's plate and budget, since they're already always underfunded, or maybe we need some design standards and we need a progression for how we're going to develop this network. You know, it just seems like those kind of construction projects should be a keystone or a cornerstone for anybody's Green New Deal.
Yeah, no, and you need to design standards. Like you need to be able to, design it once, move to the next street, move to the next street. That creates speed. If you have to rethink every single block, you need a more or less, here's your menu of options. And let's move from there.
Great.
And by the way, DOT and parks have basically the same capital budget. DEP has separate money. They're a little bit different.
Right. Yeah, and EDC also. And then, we have our weird one-offs like the Hudson River Park Trust. So, it is all over the map. And it's big, we get people all the time who don't even know who to complain to when they have an issue. Because that's just the nature of it today. But yeah, it'd be great if we could get, a real policy and plan around those things. On your, you mentioned expanding City Bike. It's one of the things to my mind, since the mayor released the expansion plan, that's going pretty well in the city. And City Bike in September saw its highest ever usage, even without, office commuting or any tourism. But is there a role for city government in, and I'm not sure which piece of it, you would emphasize, either in helping to underwrite some of the capital equipment that would be needed to take it even further, or whether we should be looking at more subsidies for lower income folks to be able to join. There are programs already with NYCHA residents, SNAP recipients, or maybe both.
There are programs for anyone who's a NYCHA resident to get discounted City Bike. They also, have expanded it to many essential workers as well, and for people who are eligible for SNAP. I think those are all great things. But I also do think if they are not going to move quickly enough, that we need to help move them along. But I also, I think if you build it, they will come. Your revenue will be there.
Right. No, I think especially if the city's matching them with the kind of greenways and protected bike lanes that we've been talking about. Also on bike parking, the city recently announced it would be doing 10,000 new bike racks a year after kind of letting the program sort of dwindle down quite close to, very little action in terms of curbside racks. But we also now have a startup in the city who's trying to build protected bike parking pods, and they have a swipe key model, and the bike parking structures themselves are very modular. So you could do a big one, you could do a small one, depending on where space permits. But it's still been very hard for them to function on public space because they use advertising for revenue. And even with private operators, they have a very hard time because it doesn't really fit, neatly into a building department category. And so it's ironically put the Port Authority out way ahead of the city in terms of creating spaces for them to actually set these things up, which to me is like, come on, we got to be able to do better than that. So can we anticipate a Garcia administration that's going to hurl, secure bike parking forward? I mean, one of the hallmarks of the most sustainable transportation systems today is using your rail infrastructure and connecting it to bikes. And then you get the sort of, urban efficiency of rail and the door-to-door convenience of, cars outside the city, because they work together really well. But amazingly, given all our rail infrastructure in this country, in the city, we don't really do that very much, with the exception of some city bike stations at subway stops. Right.
No, I think you need to rethink it in one swipe. Why aren't you getting on a city bike that gets you on the subway, gets you to work? Why isn't it one swipe to a bus? Because it might be that's where you are connecting to.
Right.
See transportation holistically, and that it is possible to make these interconnections, because I completely agree. If you're 10 blocks from your nearest subway station and you can take a bike, you're more likely to go take the subway than you are to drive your car. And that is an important change.
If we have providers of bike parking that we can put at these stations as well, for people to use their own bikes, can we get out of their way and realize that they've created the solution that we need, and and help them do their, what they do.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be,
That would be exciting.
it would be exciting. It would be very exciting. Um, we're sort of getting close to time here. Is there anything else you want to underline?
I think that we have this opportunity at this moment to reimagine the public realm and to really see it as a network of bike lanes, but also of greenways connecting our parks to each other, so that we all end up breathing cleaner air, and having cooler streets and envisioning a future that is more sustainable, that we are all healthier because of it.
I haven't gotten to really go through your sort of public safety or policing policies, but is your approach to police reform or NYPD governance something that's going to sort of allay fears that some people have of, we can create all these great spaces, but then there are parts of the population that are still going to be uncomfortable using them.
If we create something that is supposed to be a bike lane, then we actually have to ensure that it is a bike lane, and not pretend that it's just, green colored parking. Because otherwise it's just a waste of money and endangers folks. So we do need to have enforcement of what we choose to do.
Sure, absolutely. But can we also probably then hope to move away from something like, NYPD blitzes for not having a bike bell, or, the kinds of sidewalk parking summonsing patterns that we see that tend to focus in people of color, persons of color neighborhoods.
Yeah, we start by why do we even have on the books that there is a bike belt requirement?
Yes.
You could start with that. Because we should enforce the laws that we all agree are what we really want to see happening, and getting rid of some of those regulations would be a very good first start. In PD, we're going to have to work on rebuilding trust with community, but we still need to ensure that they are there to protect and to serve.
Kathryn Garcia, candidate for mayor. We will be seeing you in our bike lanes, on our streets, and in our Zoom forums. Thank you so much for taking the time to address these issues tonight, to lay out your vision, to talk about your priorities, and to allow us to talk about some of the things you've put down in your policies. Really encourage people to look at everybody's website, and especially the transportation sections that we have a number of candidates who really, put some work into thinking this stuff through, and would represent a significant change from where we are today.
Yes, no, and so definitely there's even more detail on my website, kgfornyc.com. I do encourage you to go take a look, and really thank you for having me.